We continue our study about small things, small events the world considers some small people. We've talked about the woman who anointed Jesus. That was important. He said that was preparing him for his burial. We've talked about how that Jesus took the small lunch of the boy, fed 5,000 from it. We've talked about some of the other instances pertaining to the Apostle Paul, those who helped him on the road to Damascus, those that helped him down the wall. All of these people, and especially when we studied about Naaman, so many different things there that relatively insignificant and small things we might think, but were so important in that scenario. And we talked about last time the death of Ahab and how that some unknown Syrian soldier shot an arrow into the air and it hit him and killed him even as he disguised himself, trying to avoid being killed. But like Moses said, be sure your sins will find you out. The prophet had already told Ahab what was going to happen to him. And the dogs would lick the blood right where Naboth had died. But not only Ahab, but also his mean old wife Jezebel. In 1 Kings chapter 21, and this of course was after the situation with Naboth and taking his vineyard, in verse 23 of that chapter, and of Jezebel also spake the Lord, saying, the dogs shall eat Jezebel by the wall of Jezreel. Now tonight I want us to look at the death of Jezebel. I think we will discover some things about small things that are important and meaningful that can help us in our life to realize that we do matter and what we say and do and think is important. And when we do what we consider to be small things, why, when they're turned over into the service of God, they become very important. Now, I think we need some historical background to this particular event of the death of Jezebel. Go back to the time in northern Israel, Ahab and Jezebel were ruling, and when Ahab was killed, his son Ahaziah was made king. But he didn't reign but 2 years. He fell through a lattice, and it so injured him that he died. He didn't have an heir, so his brother Joram became king. So we have Ahab, and then Ahaziah, and Joram. Ahab and Jezebel had another child, and her name was Athaliah. And she plays an important part in the history of these nations right through here. Now shift from northern Israel to southern Judah. There was Jehoshaphat, and when he died, he had a son named Joram, like Ahab did, and he became king. And after Joram, here's the tragic thing about Joram. He married Athaliah, the daughter of Ahab and Jezebel. But they had a child that was also named Ahaziah. Ahab had a son named Ahaziah. Jehoshaphat had a grandson named Ahaziah. Now the time of our study tonight begins with Joram in northern Israel being king, and Ahaziah in southern Judah being king. Earlier, the prophet Elijah had been appointed to anoint a man to be the next king in northern Israel named Jehu. He also appointed Elisha to be his successor as God's prophet. Elijah had died, Elisha was prophesying, And Elisha said the time had come for Jehu to now become king of northern Israel. So he dispatched a servant. And by the way, as we study these things, see if you can't maybe pick out the small people involved. I think you can. He sent a servant, we don't know what his name was, to Jehu and tell him, now God has anointed you to be the next king. And time is for you to take the throne of northern Israel. So Jehu gets set to go and dispose of Joram, who was then reigning. Now Joram was recuperating at a certain locality. He had been wounded in battle. And Ahaziah, which was, by the way, his nephew, had come to visit Joram. So these two kings were at the same place. And here comes Jehu. Well, Jehu had a company with him, and they saw him coming, and they said, "Who is that?" And they said, "It must be Jehu. He driveth his chariot furiously." Evidently, Jehu had a reputation of driving like a lot of folks, none of you, of course, but like some folks do today. My mother called Jehu the first hot rodder. He was a hot rider. He rode hard and furious. And when he came, they said, "Is it peace?" And Jehu said, "There'll never be any peace as long as Jezebel is living." And so Joram told Ahaziah, "This is treachery." And indeed, for those two kings it was, because Jehu first smote Joram, the king of northern Israel, whose place he would take. And Ahaziah tried to flee, but Joram also killed him. So this man killed both kings the same day. Now, what does this have to do with Jezebel? Well, a little bit later on, Jehu goes to the locality where Jezebel was. She had survived her husband and her two sons, and so Jehu comes after her. And she reminds him and says, "Jehu, don't you remember Zimri?" Now, who was Zimri? As you look at the kings of northern Israel, there was first Jeroboam and then his son Nadab. And they were killed by Baasha and his son Elah. And Elah was killed by Zimri. Zimri only reigned for 7 days before Omri, who was the father of Ahab, killed him. So what was Jezebel saying Jehu? Telling Jehu, says, "Don't you remember Zimri? You remember what happened to him when he tried to take over?" She was trying to intimidate him. She was trying to warn him against the things that he was doing, taking the throne from the family of Ahab. She was evidently on a second or third story of the building. He looked up. He said, "Who is on my side? Throw her down." And there were some people up there that took her and threw her down. And she splattered. And Jehu took his horse and he stomped her, what was remaining of her. Then he did a rather peculiar thing. He went in and had a meal. And while he was in there, he said, "You know, she was a king's daughter. She should be buried properly." Great love and affection for Jezebel now, wasn't it? She should be taken care of. But when they went out to get her, what had happened? The dogs had eaten Jezebel. What had the prophet said was going to happen to her? The dogs would eat Jezebel there in Jezreel. And that's exactly what happened. Now, the insignificance, relatively speaking, people of this account, it was not Ahab or Jezebel or Ahaziah or Joram or Jehoshaphat or Joram or Ahaziah or anybody like that, or like Jehu. It was the messenger that the prophet sent to Jehu. He was a relatively small character. But I think about those people, those 3 or 4 eunuchs that threw Jezebel down. Who were they? We don't know. They're not named. Was what they did very important? Why, certainly it was significant. It meant the demise of a wicked woman and the fulfillment of a prophecy of God and the demonstration of the justice of God against an evil people. Yes, they played an important role. I doubt that they realized how significant they really were. They may have been afraid of Jehu, but whatever motivated them to throw Jezebel down, they did it. They're small people. We don't know who they were or what happened to them later. But what they did was significant, wasn't it? It was important. Well, that's the end of Jezebel. But that's not the end of her influence. I mentioned to you a moment ago that over in southern Judah, that Jehoshaphat's son, Joram, had married the daughter of Ahab and Jezebel, Athaliah. And they had this son, Ahaziah, one of the 2 kings that Jehu killed. And do you know, after Ahaziah, her son, was killed, she took over. I don't know how she managed to just take over, except the Bible says she destroyed all of the potential heirs to the kingdom. She had them killed. That's how she was able to take power. She had a lot of her mama in her, didn't she? And she took over the rule there of southern Judah. And having killed all of the potential heirs except one. Right, the one that she was going to try to kill were her grandchildren, Joash. How did Joash get away? Well, there were 2 people that are not too prominent in the Bible. One was named Jehoiada. He was a priest. The other was Jehoshaphat. Now, Jehoshaphat was a sister to King Joram. And so Jehoshaphat took little Joash, who was the son of Ahaziah, that would have been the grandson of Athaliah, and she would have killed him if she had found him. But she didn't find him. And they hid him for a number of years. He was just a small child when all this took place. But they hid him until finally the day came. Jehoiada, who was a good priest and a good man, and Jehoshaphat, they said, time has come to get rid of Athaliah and put Joash on the throne. And so they did. It's right humorous. When the men came to destroy Athaliah, she cried, treason, treason. Of all people that would have known about treason, it would have been Athaliah, all right. She was guilty of sin and guilty of treason herself, and they executed Athaliah, and Joash became the king. Now, why is that so significant? In the prophets, the Messiah was going to be a descendant of the family of David. Jehoshaphat and Joram and Ahaziah and Joash, they were all descendants of the family of David. Now, if Athaliah had been able to destroy Joash, she would have been able to cut that lineage of the family of David. What would have happened then to the prophets of God and what they said the Messiah was to come? And remember, the kingdom of Judah was a type of the kingdom of which Jesus Christ was king, and he was to be of the seed of David. And the Apostle Paul wrote about how that he was the seed of David. And so what Jehoshaphat and Jehoiada did was to preserve the lineage of the family of David, of the throne of southern Judah, that otherwise would have been destroyed and would have uprooted the prophecies of God. How important was it what they did? Oh, friend, we can't hardly emphasize the magnitude of what was accomplished by them preserving Joash, because it kept the prophecy alive. It kept the family of David alive. It's a very sad sequence, I think, a sad sequence that took place concerning Joash. Joash now, his life was spared by Jehoiada and Jehoshaphat. But Jehoiada and Jehoshaphat had a son named Zechariah. As long as Jehoiada the priest lived, Joash was a good king. He was a righteous king. He was commended. But when Jehoiada died, Joash became influenced by the wicked elements in southern Judah. The son of Jehoiada and Jehoshaphat, Zechariah, he rebuked Joash for what he was doing. Joash didn't take that. Joash had the man killed. Here was Joash who had been spared by Jehoiada, and yet his own pride caused him to kill the son of the very man that had spared his life and made him king. I think that's pretty sad, don't you? That's a pretty sorry thing about Joash. Even though he continued the lineage of David, he turned out to be a scoundrel, just about as wicked as anybody in the whole nation. Well, the important people that were not too prominent in all the affairs would be Jehoiada and Jehoshaphat. I don't know whether they realized how important it was what they were doing, but I sort of think they must have thought, we've got to keep this king alive. And they did. Well, that's the first two stories I want to bring to your attention about deeds that were done by relatively small people. I want to bring up another question. In Judges chapter 4, we read how that the Canaanites were dominant over the Israelites. The king of the Canaanites was named Jabin, and Jabin's captain was named Sisera. Well, this was the time when Deborah came to the forefront. She was a prophetess. The man that was supposed to be leading the people of Israel was named Barak. And Deborah comes to Barak and he says, you need to drive these people out. The Lord says for you to do it. And he said, I'll go if you go with me. I don't know whether he was chicken, whether he knew she would be stronger than he was, or whether he wanted God's prophetess to be with him. But whatever was his motive, he said, I'll go if you go with me. She said, all right, I'll go with you. But the glory for the victory that's going to take place will not belong to you. It will belong to a woman. You know, when I was teaching youngsters these stories in Judges, and I said you belong to a woman, nearly every one of them thought it was going to be Deborah. I remember there was one little small-aleck boy in there. He had read ahead, and he found out that it wasn't Deborah, and he just destroyed my whole story right there. I just couldn't, just had to, all right, I said, now you know, so you be quiet and let me finish the story. So they went into battle. Well, the Israelites prevailed, and Sisera fled. And where did he flee? He fled to the tent of a woman named Jael, Jael, Jael. She was a wife of a man named Heber. Heber was a friend of Jabin, and so he thought, they'll be safe there. They'll take care of him. And so he went in, and he said, hide me. And so she did, and she let him lay down to rest and gave him a bottle of milk. And he told her, now, if anybody comes looking for me, you tell him I'm not here. And so Jabin let him go on to sleep. And she took a tent peg and a nail, they called, and while he was asleep, oh, these are gory things. They're some terrible people. She drove that tent peg through his temple. Well, he had a headache that even aspirin wouldn't cure. He was done. Now, she got the glory for the victory over these people. I call it jail with a nail made him fail. And he sure did. And that was, she wasn't an important person otherwise, but she accomplished something there that helped the people of Israel in a very crucial time in their history. Well, let's look at another. There's not a one of you here that's not familiar with the account of David fighting Goliath. David, a small shepherd lad, who had come to the scene of battle because he was delivering supplies to his brothers who were in Saul's army. Of course, you know that Goliath was challenging the people of Israel. Come out and fight. Send out a man that'll fight me. One-on-one. Winner take all. If I defeat him, you'll be our servant. If he defeats us, or defeats me, we'll be your servants. And he challenged them day in and day out. And Saul and all the rest of them were fearful. Well, here comes the little shepherd lad with his supplies for his brothers. And he heard this giant speaking reproachfully of God and of Israel. And he said, why didn't somebody take care of that fella? He said, I'll go fight him. Well, they didn't want to let him go fight for a while. They thought he couldn't do that. Saul said, here, take my armor. David said, no, I don't want that. I don't know how to use that. First of all, it's too big, and I've never have been trained with that, and I don't want that. And he got small weapons. 5 smooth stones with his slingshot. And he went out to face this giant. There he was with his armor bearer and all his shield and his sword, his helmet and everything. And he just reproached David. He just scorned him. He just ridiculed him. And David said, you come out here with all of your armor, I'll come out here in the name of the Lord. David knew he had the advantage even though Goliath didn't realize it. And David took one of those stones and he slung that stone and it hit that giant in the forehead and down he went. And David took Goliath's own sword and took off his head. You know, I think about things like that. I don't see how people could do that even when they had the power to do that. I just don't believe I could do that. I can't even wring a head off of a chicken. I just never did like to do that. My mother could. She could snap that head off of that chicken, and that chicken would go all over everywhere for a while, and finally he'd give up. But David just killed him right there. Now, that was a small thing, wasn't it? You can think of all the weaponry that people will use in their fights. I want to raise this question to you. Why did David take 5 smooth stones? He just needed 1. If he had confidence in God, why would he take 5? He had confidence in himself, obviously, or he wouldn't tackle the job. Why did he take 5? Now, there is such a thing as being overconfident, I suppose. That if you'd taken that 1 stone and slung, and it might have hit or might have missed, he had ammunition afterwards. And he could have relied upon his supply of ammunition and take another crack at it. Maybe that's the reason he took more than 1. He took 5. But also, the Bible indicates that Goliath had 4 relatives that were giants. And it could be that once Goliath fell, those other fellows would sort of take vengeance. If they did, David was ready for him. I sort of got an idea that once they saw David such a crack shot, they didn't want to bother with David. One by one, they did get killed. One time, one got killed preserving the life of David. Somebody saved David's life because the giant was about to kill him. But you know, those Philistines, they didn't do what Goliath said they would do. He said, "We'll be your servants if you kill me." Why, they didn't. They fled, but the Israelites pursued them and won a great victory that day. 5 small stones, 1 slingshot, and a little old shepherd lad. Not very prominent people right at that particular time. Of course, this rocketed David to be a national hero. He was a national hero from then on. So much so that later on, when the people were singing, "Saul has slain his thousands, and David has slain his 10,000s," and Saul couldn't take that. Saul was envious and jealous, and he sought to destroy David. In fact, he threw his javelin at David, tried to kill him. He had some very incompetent help, and I want to bring that out and show how somebody did something that was relatively insignificant but important in saving David's life. He threw a javelin at David, and he missed. But David realized his life was in jeopardy there. And Saul dispatched people to go and kill David. Now his wife, what was her name? Michal? Was that it? His wife said, "If you don't get out of here, he's going to kill you." And so that night, she helped him slip away. And when the men came to kill him, she said, "You can't have him to kill." Well, why? She said, "He's sick." And you know what those brilliant people did who had come to kill David? They went back and told Saul, "We can't kill him, he's sick." That's no wonder Saul was frustrated to have helpers like that. And so he sent again to go get David, but David wasn't there. And his wife had made his bed and put stuffings in there and made it look like somebody was in the bed. And of course he wasn't there, and he escaped. And this angered Saul. Oh, he was so mad at his daughter. And she said, "Well, he threatened to kill me if I wouldn't let him get away." Of course, that wasn't so. But anyway, she was trying to spare her life. But what a small thing she did to help him get away, and to put a dummy in that bed to make him look like he was sick. And I think of the small people, and they were the dumbest, stupidest, small people of whom you ever read were those men who went to kill David and said, we can't do it because he's sick. Well, let's get him well, and then we'll fix him up. It's like not long ago there was a man who was supposed to be executed, and they post some brilliant judge can't execute him. He's got cancer. Now, you know, when you've got people like that on the court, we got trouble. And folks, we got trouble because that's the kind of people we got in some of our courts. It reminds me of this thing about David. But those small people, look how much influence they had in the affairs of this nation through which our Savior came. What they did, it all contributed to the unfolding of God's plan for man's salvation. They did not realize the importance of their deeds. Their names are not even recorded except in a few rare instances. Now, your name may not be recorded in the journals of history either. You may not even get your name in the church bulletin like I mentioned last week. But you know, what did you do today? There were some small things that you did and you could have done and that I could have done. Send a card, make a call, do a favor, do something to help somebody along the way. Those things matter, folks. They're important. In fact, that's what makes up our life, isn't it? Well, next week, Lord willing, we'll look at some, I can consider, some very interesting people of the Bible of whom we don't have names, but oh, how they served. And that's the centurions of whom we read in the New Testament. Well, that'll conclude our class for tonight.